Marta woke up every day before the sun rose. The sounds of her small apartment in the suburbs were muffled by the growing city traffic that was just beginning to come to life. Her neighborhood, simple but cozy, always reminded her of the hardships she had faced since childhood. Coming from a humble family, Marta had known from an early age what it was like to fight for her place. Her parents, tireless workers, had taught her the value of dignity and honesty. They taught her that no matter where you are, you must always keep your head held high. Marta reflected on this as she prepared for another day of work at the large multinational company. Her cleaning uniform was simple: black pants and a blue shirt that had faded over time. Although her job was humble, she performed it with dedication. The company she worked for was immense, occupying a luxurious building in the heart of the city. Important executives walked the halls discussing millions as if it were pocket change. Marta often wondered what it would be like to live in such a world. Upon arriving at the company, she passed through the main lobby, where everything seemed to sparkle. The marble floors reflected the powerful lights, and the environment exuded power. Every detail of that place conveyed opulence, from the soft, expensive scent of fresh flowers to the walls adorned with modern art. However, Marta was an invisible figure in that setting. Executives passed by her without even offering a glance or a good morning. In that world of million-dollar deals, she was just the cleaner. Little by little, Marta made her rounds through the wide, bright corridors, pushing her cleaning cart. She knew every corner of that building like the back of her hand. She knew the schedule of each executive, their habits, and even the types of coffee they ordered during meetings. Despite always being nearby, she was never noticed. It was as if her presence meant nothing. In important meetings where the partners discussed major projects and investments, she was there, silent, cleaning the floor or organizing scattered papers. In truth, Marta overheard much more than most people realized. While sweeping, collecting the trash, and organizing the desks, she paid attention to the conversations around her. She knew who was worried about deadlines, who was bad-mouthing whom behind their backs, and especially who considered themselves superior. That was a constant in the environment where she worked. Men in suits talking about how the company's success depended on their brilliant decisions. Few, if any, stopped to think about the people who kept that building running, like Marta. Often, as she overheard these conversations, Marta was reminded of her life before arriving at that company. She remembered how it all started, and of one person in particular, the founder of the multinational. The story between Marta and the founder was old and little known. Before the company became the corporate giant it was today, the founder was a simple man with an innovative idea and an uncontrollable thirst for success. It was during this period of crisis, before success truly arrived, that Marta came into his life. She worked at a small office where she cleaned at night, and there she met the man who would later change her life in ways she could not have predicted. She remembered clearly the day the founder collapsed in the office, desperate over a contract that might not be signed. His company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and he was devastated. Marta, who at the time was also facing difficulties, offered him words of encouragement and even helped organize some documents he needed to present. That small gesture of kindness and the compassion she showed were unforgettable for him. When the company finally took off, Marta was already working at another job, but the founder did not forget her. In a gesture of gratitude, he included her as a shareholder, with a small percentage of the company's stock. At the time, it seemed like a symbolic gift, but to Marta, it was a gesture of recognition and respect she would never forget. However, this was a secret that few knew. The founder himself had been discreet about it, and after his death, the new executives were unaware of the true position Marta held within the company. Now, every day, Marta walked through the halls of that multinational company knowing that, despite her appearance as a cleaner, she owned a small but significant part of that empire. But in silence, she continued to work as she always had, with the same dignity and dedication she had learned since childhood. Yet the prejudice and disdain she faced daily were becoming harder to ignore. The looks, the whispers, and the jokes made during the meetings where she was present, but invisible, were wounds that accumulated in her soul. Marta knew that being black and a cleaner in a corporate environment dominated by powerful white men was a daily challenge. It wasn't just the hard and repetitive work that tired her, but the constant weight of veiled racism and social prejudice. Many times they called her simple, a word that, in the eyes of those men, was synonymous with insignificance. However, Marta knew that something grander was reserved for her. She did not allow the lack of respect she received to define her. In her heart, she believed that her value was not in the position she held, but in the person she was. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the main corridor that day, something inside her began to change. She had endured many jokes, laughter, and looks of disdain over the years. But now something was different. Perhaps it was the fact that, behind that humble appearance, Marta held a power that no one suspected. She knew that the game was about to change, and that her patience was wearing thin. But for now, she would continue to observe in silence, knowing that the right opportunity would come. And when it did, Marta would be ready. That week would be decisive for the multinational company. A series of important meetings were scheduled, involving million-dollar contracts, new investments, and a possible merger with a large foreign corporation. The atmosphere was tense, and the executives seemed more pressured than ever. Marta could feel that tension in the air as she walked through the luxurious halls, pushing her cleaning cart as she always did. She was used to being a silent observer, overhearing bits of conversations and watching the great men of the company discuss their financial destinies. That day, Marta was tasked with cleaning the main meeting room before a big gathering between the partners. It was a large room, decorated with noble wood panels, black leather chairs, and an imposing glass table in the center. Everything in that room exuded power and wealth. It was the heart of the company's decision-making, where contracts that changed many lives were sealed with handshakes and signatures. As Marta tidied up the room, she overheard the first executives arriving, hastily discussing the company's future. As usual, they didn't greet her. They walked past her as if she were part of the furniture, invisible and irrelevant. Marta was used to this. For years, she had been ignored by the men and women who made the big decisions. The silent disdain she faced daily no longer surprised her, but today something inside her felt heavier. The routine of disdain was starting to weigh her down. As the executives gathered, she began cleaning the last parts of the room, knowing she would soon have to leave so they could begin their meeting. It was a choreography she knew by heart, preparing the room, arranging forgotten papers, cleaning coffee stains, and then leaving unnoticed like a ghost no one saw. But today, something different was about to happen. The partners entered in groups, talking among themselves about the upcoming merger. The air was thick with anticipation, and as Marta swept the floor, she heard every word they exchanged. One of the partners, a man in a well-tailored gray suit with a cynical smile, was particularly excited. He was known for his sarcastic jokes and arrogant attitude toward lower-level employees. To him, people like Marta were mere disposable pieces on the large corporate chessboard. And at that moment, he decided to make Marta the target of his joke. As she finished tidying the room, the partner spoke loudly, turning to the others. "You know, I'm always impressed with how hard these cleaners work. I mean, it's not just anyone who can spend their whole day cleaning up after us and never complain. Must be some kind of special talent, don't you think?" He said this with a malicious smile, and the other executives in the room began to laugh. Marta pretended not to hear, as she always did, and continued to clean the table. She knew it was pointless to react. Reacting would mean creating a problem, and in that environment, problems like hers were quickly swept under the rug. The partner, seeing that his joke had gotten a few laughs, decided to go further. Approaching the meeting table, he looked directly at Marta while speaking. "Maybe we should give her a promotion. What do you think? From cleaner to, cleaning supervisor." The tone of mockery in his voice was unmistakable, and once again, the executives laughed. The laughter echoed through the room, and Marta continued with her task, without letting on how she felt. Inside, each laugh was like a knife cutting through her dignity. She had endured jokes and disdain before, but in that moment, something in Marta began to change. She was tired. Years of silence and invisibility, of becoming part of the scenery to avoid conflict, were starting to weigh on her in a way she could no longer ignore. Just then, the CEO entered the room. He was a tall man, with an imposing posture and an air of superiority that seemed to demand respect simply by his presence. He noticed the situation and, seeing the partners laughing, asked, "What's going on here?" The partner in the gray suit, still smiling, explained the joke about Marta, expecting the CEO to join in and reinforce the tone of mockery, and he wasn't disappointed. "Oh, yeah," said the CEO, smiling maliciously. "The most dedicated cleaner in the building. Maybe we should put her on the board too, huh? I bet she would know exactly how to clean up the mess these contracts are causing." More laughter. Now the CEO himself was making jokes at Marta's expense, and the executives, who always followed the boss's lead, laughed louder, some even patting each other on the back in approval. Marta, still sweeping the floor, felt diminished in a way she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a joke, it was a public humiliation, a demonstration of how they saw her, not as a person, but as a tool, a disposable piece of the scenery with no value beyond her practical function. She finished cleaning the room and left silently as she always did. But as she walked through the halls, something different began to stir inside her. Each step echoed in the empty halls, and in her mind the words she had heard moments before hammered like a painful reminder of how deeply she was underestimated. That public humiliation, that racist and disrespectful joke, was the final straw. Years of patience and silence were about to end. However, Marta knew it wasn't the time to act impulsively. She took a deep breath and continued her work, but her gaze, once serene and resigned, now reflected something new, a quiet determination. She carried with her a secret that few knew, a secret that, once revealed, would change everything in that company. The disdain the executives felt for her, the humiliation she had endured, the racist joke that had been made, all of it now carried a different weight. Marta knew the game was about to change, and this time she wouldn't be defeated. She wasn't just a cleaner. She never had been. And the time was coming to show everyone who she really was. That night, after leaving work, Marta arrived home later than usual. Her apartment, simple and small, was a stark contrast to the luxurious environment where she worked. The walls were decorated with old family photos, reflecting a history of struggle and perseverance. Marta sat in her kitchen chair, finally allowing the weight of exhaustion to settle on her shoulders. But it wasn't just physical tiredness. The humiliation she had endured that day haunted her. The executive's laughter echoed in her mind, and the disrespectful words from the CEO and the partners burned in her memory. She sat there, staring into the distance, remembering every detail of that day. But instead of letting it crush her, a decision began to form in her mind. Marta had always been a patient woman, but she knew the time had come to act. She could no longer tolerate the daily disdain and humiliation. More than that, she knew she had a powerful card up her sleeve, something the executives didn't even dream of. Marta had a secret that dated back many years, before the company became the corporate giant it was today. A secret she had carefully guarded, but now it was ready to be revealed. Marta was about 30 years old when she started working as a cleaner in a small office in the city center. At that time, things were very different. The place was modest, and the company's owner was a visionary man, but tormented by the challenges he faced. The company's founder, Mr. Jorge Alencar, was an entrepreneur who deeply believed in the potential of his idea, but he was on the brink of bankruptcy. His startup was struggling financially, and he could barely pay the salaries of the few employees he had left. Marta had started working there out of necessity, just like she did at other offices, cleaning after hours. At that time, she was a simple woman, but with a generous heart. One day, while cleaning Jorge's small office, she noticed that he was there later than usual, with his head down, surrounded by scattered papers. He looked defeated. Marta, always attentive to other people's suffering, sensed something was wrong. She hesitated for a moment, but decided to approach. "Is everything all right, Mr. Jorge?" she asked softly. Jorge let out a deep sigh and looked at Marta, surprised that someone was still there at that hour. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with worry. "No, Marta. Nothing is all right," he said, laughing without humor and rubbing his hands over his face. "I think I'm going to lose everything. I've worked so hard for this, but things aren't going well. Investors have lost faith in me, and the money's running out." Marta looked around, seeing the pile of unfinished contracts and documents scattered across the room. She didn't know much about business, but she knew enough to recognize the weight of the struggle Jorge was carrying. Feeling compassion, she decided to stay a little longer. She began helping him organize the papers, cleaning up the mess and putting the documents in order. As she worked, she offered words of encouragement. "I don't know much about business, Mr. Jorge, but I know you're a good person. I've worked in many places, and not all employers care about their employees. But you do. Maybe things seem tough now, but I believe you'll find a way." Those words coming from Marta touched something inside Jorge. He remained silent for a few moments, watching her work. Marta was there, a simple cleaner, but somehow her presence gave him strength. That night, Marta helped Jorge reorganize his contracts and get back on his feet. A few months later, the company's fortunes turned around. A new investor appeared. The crucial contract was signed, and the small office began to grow. The company finally found its path to success. Jorge, recognizing the kindness and help Marta had offered in his darkest hour, never forgot her. When the company began to prosper, he made sure to keep Marta as part of the team, even though she continued in her cleaning position. However, in a gesture of deep gratitude, he decided to do something more. One day he called her into his office, now located in a larger and more sophisticated building. "Marta, I will never forget what you did for me. At that moment, you were the only person who cared. That's why I want to give you something in recognition of what you did for me and for the company." He smiled, handing her a document. It was a contract. Jorge had included Marta as a shareholder of the company, with a small percentage of stock. At the time, this seemed almost symbolic, as the company was still growing. Marta, surprised and emotional, accepted the gesture with humility, not knowing that this small piece of paper would one day have incalculable value. Time passed, and Mr. Jorge Alencar eventually stepped down from the company due to health reasons. Shortly after, he passed away, and the company was taken over by new executives, including the current CEO. None of them knew the story of Marta and the founder, nor of her shareholding. The small percentage of stock she owned seemed irrelevant at the time. But with the company's exponential growth over the years, those shares multiplied in value. Now, in her small apartment, Marta looked at the folder of documents she had stored in her cabinet. Inside was the contract Jorge had given her many years ago, proving her stake in the company. The value of the shares had increased so much that she now had enough power to demand significant changes. With those shares, Marta could do more than simply continue her life as a cleaner. She could directly influence the company's future, and the futures of those who had disrespected her for so long. She picked up the phone and called the lawyer who had been tracking her shareholding over the years. He was a man she trusted, discreet and efficient. Marta had spoken to him a few times before, but she had never felt the need to act, until now. "Hello, doctor. This is Marta. I think it's time." On the other end of the line, the lawyer seemed to understand what that meant. He had been waiting for this moment, knowing that with her shareholding power, Marta could change the dynamics within the company. He began to explain the legal possibilities and how she could exercise her rights as a shareholder. Marta listened carefully. The plan was beginning to take shape in her mind. She wasn't just going to claim her rightful place in the company. Marta knew she had the power to change the entire structure and finally correct the injustice she had endured for so long. With her lawyer by her side, she would begin to strategize. From that moment on, Marta would no longer be the invisible cleaner everyone underestimated. She had reached her limit. Now it was time to use the strength she had quietly built over the years. And this time, she would do it with finality and determination. Marta was ready. The plan had been carefully crafted with the help of her lawyer, who had reviewed every detail of her shareholding position. She knew that the coming days would be decisive, and although she felt a mix of nerves and anticipation, something stronger drove her. Justice. Years of disdain and humiliation were about to come to an end. That morning, Marta left her house earlier than usual, but this time her heart felt lighter. When she entered the company building, the same security guards greeted her with their usual indifference, as if she were part of the scenery, something seen but unnoticed. She walked calmly through the gleaming corridors she knew so well, passing by the offices of executives who had treated her like a shadow. Marta knew that today would be different. She would no longer be invisible. The board meeting was scheduled for the late afternoon. As a shareholder, Marta had the right to attend, and this time, she would make sure to be there. Earlier, however, her lawyer had sent an official notice to the board, requesting an emergency meeting to discuss leadership and management issues. In the formal email, Marta's name hadn't been explicitly mentioned, only the convocation of shareholders. The executives, accustomed to their routines of power, probably had no idea who was about to enter that room. When the afternoon finally arrived, Marta prepared herself. She no longer wore her cleaning uniform, but a simple, elegant outfit, reflecting the dignity she had always carried with her. She looked in the mirror before leaving, and for the first time in a long while, she saw not only a strong woman, but a woman in control of her destiny. As she approached the boardroom, Marta felt her heart beat faster for a moment, but as she opened the door, the silence that fell over the room was immediate. The partners and the CEO were all present, waiting for some major investor or important shareholder to enter. They could never have imagined it would be Marta, the cleaner they had always ignored. The CEO, who had not yet noticed Marta's presence, was engaged in an animated conversation with the other executives about new business deals. When the door opened and he looked in her direction, his smile faded, replaced by an expression of pure shock. "What's going on here?" he asked, frowning. Marta took a step forward, maintaining her firm and dignified posture. She wasn't there to play games. All eyes were on her. The silence in the room was deafening. The executives didn't know how to react, confused about what she was doing there, dressed so differently and clearly in a position they hadn't associated with her. Before anyone could speak, Marta's lawyer entered the room right behind her, carrying a folder of documents. He greeted her respectfully and, with the utmost formality, declared, "Gentlemen, this is Marta Almeida, a shareholder of the company. We are here to discuss relevant issues regarding leadership and management." The impact of those words was immediate. The partners looked at Marta with a mixture of surprise, confusion, and embarrassment. The CEO, still trying to process what was happening, paused before speaking. "This has to be some kind of mistake," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "Marta, she is—" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable trying to phrase his sentence without sounding even more disrespectful. "She's a cleaner." The indignation and scorn in the CEO's voice were evident. To him, someone like Marta, a mere cleaner, could never belong in that room, much less as a shareholder. The other partners were equally taken aback, exchanging nervous glances. No one knew how to react to this revelation, and the discomfort grew in the room. Marta, however, remained calm. She wasn't there to justify herself. She was there to claim what was rightfully hers. In a firm and controlled voice, she began to speak. "I have been a shareholder in this company for many years, ever since the founder, Jorge Alencar, included me in the shareholder agreement as a gesture of gratitude for helping him when the company was still small. I own a percentage of the shares, and with the company's growth, my power as a shareholder has also grown. It's all legally documented, and as a shareholder, I have the right to be here and to participate in the decisions affecting this company's leadership." The silence returned to the room. The CEO, now visibly uncomfortable, shifted in his chair, clearly uneasy. He knew that if what Marta was saying was true, things were about to change drastically. The other partners were still trying to process the situation, but one of them, the man who had made the racist jokes days earlier, tried to break the silence. "This is ridiculous," he laughed nervously. "You've been here for years cleaning the office, and now you want us to believe you're a shareholder?" The tone of mockery was still present in his voice, but there was a hint of fear behind it. Marta's lawyer intervened calmly, opening the folder of documents and distributing copies of the papers that proved her shareholding in the company. He explained clearly and directly Marta's rights as a shareholder, including her right to call meetings and vote on leadership issues. With the documents in hand, the partners had no choice but to accept the reality. Marta's power was legitimate, and they knew they couldn't ignore it. The CEO, on the other hand, was still in disbelief. He tried to regain his composure, but his attempts to undermine Marta were now useless. The weight of the papers in the partner's hands spoke louder than his words. Marta, seeing that the moment was right, continued, "For years I have worked here silently, watching as people around me treated me with disdain and disrespect. I always knew that my position did not define me, and that a person's worth is not tied to the job they hold, but to the dignity with which they live their life. However, what happened recently crossed the line. I am no longer just an invisible cleaner to you. I am a shareholder of this company, and as such, I have something to say about the leadership that's in charge. The room fell into an almost unbearable silence as Marta spoke with a strength few had witnessed before. The cleaner they had underestimated for years was now in a position of power, and no one knew how to handle it. She then looked directly at the CEO, who was still trying to mask his nervousness, and continued, I have been closely following the management of this company, and I can confidently say that what is lacking here is respect. Respect for the people who help keep this company running, regardless of their roles. And certainly respect for the shareholders who helped it grow. The CEO tried to interrupt her, but Marta's lawyer quickly silenced him, reminding him that she had the right to speak. Marta then made her final, most anticipated revelation, the one the CEO feared. Today, I am proposing a vote to remove the current CEO from his position. His leadership has been marked by arrogance, disrespect, and a lack of vision, not just towards me, but in how he conducts the company's business. I have the support of other shareholders who share this view, and I am here to ensure that change happens. The CEO, now speechless, watched in silence as the partners looked at each other, unsure of what to say. Marta, with her dignity intact, knew she had won. The fate of that company, and of everyone who had underestimated her, was about to change. The impact of Marta's declaration reverberated through the room like a thunderclap. Everyone present, executives, partners, and especially the CEO, seemed frozen, processing the implications of what had just been said. Marta, once invisible and underestimated, had just proposed something none of them could have imagined: the dismissal of the CEO, the man who had controlled the company with an iron fist and arrogance. CEO Paolo Alvim tried to hide his nervousness, but it was clear that he was shaken. His usual confidence was beginning to crack, and his eyes, once filled with superiority, now wavered. He adjusted himself in his chair, attempting to regain control of the situation. His voice, normally strong, came out weaker than expected. This is ridiculous, he began, looking around seeking support from the other executives. We're talking about a cleaner who, by some twist of fate, has a small percentage of shares. We can't be seriously considering this joke. Marta, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this won't go anywhere. Marta, unwavering, looked directly at Paolo without losing her composure. I'm not here for jokes, Mr. Alvim. I'm here to exercise my right as a shareholder and as someone who has quietly invested in this company's success for years. I will not allow you to continue using your position to perpetuate an environment of disrespect and prejudice. The decision is no longer in your hands. Paolo tried to interrupt her, but Marta continued, turning to the rest of the partners. I know for many of you it's a surprise to see me here. Maybe the idea that someone in a cleaner's role could own shares in the company seems absurd. But what's at stake isn't my title. It's the leadership of this company and its future. And as a shareholder, I demand a vote. Marta's lawyer, seated beside her, nodded in agreement. Everything was in order. They had legal backing, the support of other shareholders, and a solid foundation to move forward. Paolo, realizing that his position was more threatened than it had ever been, leaned forward, attempting one last move. He knew his time was running out. This is a low blow, Marta, he said in a more aggressive tone. You think you can just show up here and change everything because of some signed papers? The company grew under my leadership. Everything we've achieved is thanks to my vision. You have no idea what it's like to run a corporation like this. You don't know what you're doing. Marta, with a serene look, waited for him to finish. Then she responded, I may not know everything about running a corporation, Paolo, but I know what respect means. I know what it means to treat people with dignity, regardless of their position. That's something you clearly forgot a long time ago. You didn't grow this company on your own. Many workers, at all levels, contributed to this success, and they deserve to be treated with the same respect that you demand for yourself. Today, we are here to decide what is best for the company, and from what I can see, the current leadership is not up to the challenge. Marta turned to the lawyer, who opened his briefcase again and began distributing ballots to those present. The partners, still in shock, began to receive the papers, each of them wearing a look of indecision. It was clear that many of them were struggling internally. Should they support the dismissal of the CEO, the man who had led the company for so long, or follow Marta's proposal, a woman they had considered no more than a low-level employee? Paolo, desperate, started arguing with some of the partners, trying to convince them to vote in his favor. "You know what's at stake," he said, gesturing with his hands as he attempted to regain control. "Marta may have a few shares, but that doesn't mean she understands management. We need to think about the company's future, and I'm the one with the experience and knowledge to take us forward." One of the more senior partners, Roberto Mendonça, who had remained silent until then, stood up. He was a thoughtful man with decades of experience in the industry and a reputation for being respected by all. "Paolo, with all due respect," Roberto began, looking directly at the CEO, "for years we've seen your leadership shape this company, and while many of us have followed your vision, I must admit that some of your actions have hurt our image. It's not just a matter of profit or contracts. It's a matter of how we treat the people who make this company work. Marta is right in many ways, and honestly, maybe it's time for a change." Paolo stood frozen. The support he had been seeking was slipping away from him. One by one, the other partners began to ponder, exchanging significant glances, realizing that something bigger was at stake than just a CEO's position. The voting began. Each of the partners, one by one, filled out their ballots in silence. The tension in the room was palpable. Marta watched everything with the calm of someone who knew she was about to turn the tables. She had more than just the right. She had justice on her side. When the last ballot was filled, Marta's lawyer collected the votes and began to count them, announcing the result aloud. "Dismissal of the CEO. Approved." The words echoed through the room like a final verdict. Paolo Alvim, once imposing and untouchable, now seemed shrunken in his chair, speechless. He, who had commanded the company with arrogance for so many years, had been ousted by someone he hadn't even considered a threat. The silence that followed was deafening. The other executives looked at Marta with a mixture of respect and admiration. The woman they had underestimated for so long had, with patience and dignity, achieved the impossible. And she did so without losing control or stooping to the level of those who had disrespected her. Paolo, visibly defeated, stood up slowly, trying to maintain some dignity as he gathered his things. "This isn't over," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else, as he walked out of the room, leaving behind the hollow echo of his empty words. As the door closed, Marta took a deep breath. The feeling of victory was profound, but not because of revenge. It wasn't the fact that she had fired the man who had humiliated her publicly that brought satisfaction. It was the certainty that she had done the right thing. Marta, who had been ignored, underestimated, and ridiculed, had stood up to demand justice and respect. She knew that her journey didn't end there. There was much more to be done. The company needed change, and she was ready to be a part of that transformation. But at that moment, she felt that a great step had been taken. The partners, one by one, began to stand up and approach Marta. Some offered handshakes, others simply a respectful nod. The change in posture was evident. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was a powerful shareholder, someone who had earned her place with dignity and strength. When everyone had left, Marta stood alone in the room for a moment. She looked around at the glass table she had cleaned so many times, at the leather chairs where powerful men had made decisions. And now she was part of that world. Not because she sought revenge, but because she deserved it. The meeting room, now empty, seemed to echo the changes that had just occurred. Marta, alone for a moment, looked around with a deep sense of satisfaction, but it wasn't an arrogant or vengeful satisfaction. What she felt was peace, the peace of knowing that she had done what was right, that she had fought for respect and dignity, not just for herself, but for all those who, like her, had been treated as invisible. The corporate world, which once seemed so distant and unreachable, was now within her grasp. Marta had no illusions that her new position of power would be easy. She knew that many obstacles still lay ahead, that prejudice and barriers would still exist. But the difference now was that she no longer felt powerless. Marta knew who she was and what she represented. She had found her voice, and no one could silence her again. The next morning, the news of the CEO's dismissal was already circulating through the company. The corridors, usually filled with trivial conversations, were now buzzing with murmurs and curious glances. Some employees knew that Marta had been key to the decision. Others still didn't fully understand what had happened. For many, it was hard to reconcile the image of Marta, the cleaner everyone ignored, with the figure of the shareholder who had changed the company's course. But slowly, the pieces began to fit together. When Marta arrived for work that day, she was no longer wearing her cleaner's uniform. Instead, she was dressed simply but elegantly, like a professional ready for a new challenge. However, the kind smile and humility that always accompanied her were still present on her face. She walked through the corridors she knew so well, but this time, not as an invisible person. She was greeted with looks of admiration and respect. The security guards, who had always greeted her distractedly, now saluted her more attentively, some even with a warmer, "Good morning." Early that morning, Marta had a meeting with the board. Now, as a shareholder, she would take on a more active role in the company. But before thinking about her new position or the responsibilities that came with it, something more important was on her mind: changing the culture that had for so long suffocated many other employees, just as it had done to her. At the meeting, Marta was received with a mix of respect and caution. The other shareholders and board members knew that something different was happening, and many still wondered how this would affect the future of the company. Marta, with the calm she had developed over the years, took her seat at the table. The brief silence that followed was broken when one of the board members, Roberto Mendonça, spoke. "Marta, it's good to have you here with us. We know that the changes that occurred yesterday were significant, and we're all eager to hear your vision for the future." Marta smiled slightly and nodded. She knew that, at that moment, all eyes were on her, and that her next words could shape the direction of the company. With a serenity that came from deep self-awareness, she began. "For many years, I was a silent observer. I saw what worked and what didn't in this company. I saw how people here were treated, especially those in the less valued positions. Today, I have the opportunity to use that experience to bring about positive change. And my first priority is to ensure that this company is not just a place of financial success, but also a place of respect, dignity, and inclusion." The room remained silent for a moment. Marta continued without hesitation. "What happened to me is not an exception. There are many people in the lower levels of this company who work hard every day and are not seen, not heard. They are people like me who have always known their worth, but were constantly ignored. It's time to change that. If we want our company to continue growing, we need to value all the people who are part of it, not just those who make the big decisions." One of the board members, still a bit cautious, asked, "And how do you plan to implement these changes? We're talking about a significant cultural transformation." Marta was ready for that question. She had spent the night carefully thinking about the changes she wanted to see in the company. With the same determination that had brought her this far, she responded, "The first step is to create an inclusion and employee appreciation program, regardless of their roles. We will ensure that all employees have development opportunities, that their ideas are heard, and that they feel part of the company. We want to give a voice to those who have never had a chance to speak. Additionally, we will reevaluate how leadership interacts with employees, starting with promoting a culture of respect and empathy. We can no longer tolerate an environment where people are humiliated or ridiculed based on their position, race, or any other characteristic." The meeting room, now empty, seemed to echo the changes that had just occurred. Marta, alone for a moment, looked around with a deep sense of satisfaction, but it wasn't an arrogant or vengeful satisfaction. What she felt was peace, the peace of knowing that she had done what was right, that she had fought for respect and dignity, not just for herself, but for all those who, like her, had been treated as invisible. The corporate world, which once seemed so distant and unreachable, was now within her grasp. Marta had no illusions that her new position of power would be easy. She knew that many obstacles still lay ahead, that prejudice and barriers would still exist. But the difference now was that she no longer felt powerless. Marta knew who she was and what she represented. She had found her voice, and no one could silence her again. The next morning, the news of the CEO's dismissal was already circulating through the company. The corridors, usually filled with trivial conversations, were now buzzing with murmurs and curious glances. Some employees knew that Marta had been key to the decision. Others still didn't fully understand what had happened. For many, it was hard to reconcile the image of Marta, the cleaner everyone ignored, with the figure of the shareholder who had changed the company's course. But slowly, the pieces began to fit together. When Marta arrived for work that day, she was no longer wearing her cleaner's uniform. Instead, she was dressed simply but elegantly, like a professional ready for a new challenge. However, the kind smile and humility that always accompanied her were still present on her face. She walked through the corridors she knew so well, but this time, not as an invisible person. She was greeted with looks of admiration and respect. The security guards, who had always greeted her distractedly, now saluted her more attentively, some even with a warmer, "Good morning." Early that morning, Marta had a meeting with the board. Now, as a shareholder, she would take on a more active role in the company. But before thinking about her new position or the responsibilities that came with it, something more important was on her mind: changing the culture that had for so long suffocated many other employees, just as it had done to her. At the meeting, Marta was received with a mix of respect and caution. The other shareholders and board members knew that something different was happening, and many still wondered how this would affect the future of the company. Marta, with the calm she had developed over the years, took her seat at the table. The brief silence that followed was broken when one of the board members, Roberto Mendonça, spoke. "Marta, it's good to have you here with us. We know that the changes that occurred yesterday were significant, and we're all eager to hear your vision for the future." Marta smiled slightly and nodded. She knew that, at that moment, all eyes were on her, and that her next words could shape the direction of the company. With a serenity that came from deep self-awareness, she began. "For many years, I was a silent observer. I saw what worked and what didn't in this company. I saw how people here were treated, especially those in the less valued positions. Today, I have the opportunity to use that experience to bring about positive change. And my first priority is to ensure that this company is not just a place of financial success, but also a place of respect, dignity, and inclusion." The room remained silent for a moment. Marta continued without hesitation. "What happened to me is not an exception. There are many people in the lower levels of this company who work hard every day and are not seen, not heard. They are people like me who have always known their worth, but were constantly ignored. It's time to change that. If we want our company to continue growing, we need to value all the people who are part of it, not just those who make the big decisions." One of the board members, still a bit cautious, asked, "And how do you plan to implement these changes? We're talking about a significant cultural transformation." Marta was ready for that question. She had spent the night carefully thinking about the changes she wanted to see in the company. With the same determination that had brought her this far, she responded, "The first step is to create an inclusion and employee appreciation program, regardless of their roles. We will ensure that all employees have development opportunities, that their ideas are heard, and that they feel part of the company. We want to give a voice to those who have never had a chance to speak. Additionally, we will reevaluate how leadership interacts with employees, starting with promoting a culture of respect and empathy. We can no longer tolerate an environment where people are humiliated or ridiculed based on their position, race, or any other characteristic.